Good morning, colleagues, to this, the 12th meeting of the European and External Relations Committee. Can I ask everyone to make sure that electronic devices, mobile phones, etc. is switched off as it interferes with the broadcasting equipment. First up, we have two new members of the committee, so can I formally welcome colleagues of mine, Willie Coffey, MSP, and Rod Campbell, MSP. And the first agenda item will be to ask Rod and Willie to declare any relevant interest. So, Rod?
I think for good order I should declare an interest as a member of the Faculty of Advocates.
Okay, thank you. Willie?
Convener, I should declare that I'm the Parliament's SNP member of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly, in which I also serve in the European Committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to committee, and we're looking forward to working with you. Before we move on to the substantive issues of today, I want to say something about some of the events that you may be aware that unfolded last week following our business planning away day. Several articles appeared in the media last Friday and over the weekend about our private discussions. So our private discussions, following my caution, were reported to the media. I find that very troubling indeed. I did point out quite clearly that day that our work programme is something that until we deem to be in the public interest to disclose that, to be a private document, and some of that information was given to the public. If I can just remind members that any unauthorised disclosure of confidential committee discussions actually constitutes a breach of section 7.4.4 of volume 2 of the Code of Conduct. As I said, I am very disappointed and concerned that this situation has occurred, and I would hope and ask that it doesn't happen again. I understand that members may wish to intervene but given the clear constraints of, the need for confidentiality, I would maybe caution people maybe to hold fire on that, and I'd maybe suggest that we move on to the substantive agenda items that we have on their committee programme for today. Is committee in agreement with that?
Agreed to note, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Agenda item 2 is a decision on taking business in private, and it is agenda item 6, which we would be considering in the private session, and again that's pertaining to some of the work programme. Are members content to take agenda item 6 in private?
Agreed, Chair.
Yep, thank you very much. Moving on swiftly, and we're at agenda item 3, which is to consider a response from the Scottish Government to our report on EU structural funds. Jenny very helpfully is going to give us a briefing on some of that, and I'll just pass over to Jenny.
Okay, thank you very much. The Scottish Government's given us quite a substantial response to the committee's report, which was published in July. So the cover paper that you have just attempts to summarise the main points that they've written in with. Overall, it seems as if the government's very supportive of what the committee's recommended, and the main good news is that we've got a large list of points that they've agreed to come and update the committee on regularly. The first update will be forthcoming in November, and thereafter on a 6-monthly basis, which will probably be very useful as we go into the new round of structural funds, which is in 2014, as you're probably all aware. So anyway, I won't go over the points that they've agreed to update on. That's available in your paper in paragraph 2. The other 2 points highlighted in paragraphs 3 and 4 of your paper is just to highlight the fact that the Scottish Government has not agreed to the committee's recommendations to instigate a common code of practice or a champions list. The idea of those being, those were recommendations from stakeholders during the inquiry, and the idea of those was it would basically help the third sector and anyone else applying for funding to have a sort of gateway, if you like, for advice. So instead, the Scottish Government have said that they'll work with stakeholders to develop national rules and to clarify systems, roles and responsibilities. And I believe they're doing that through the working group, which they already have established. The final thing is, you might recall that the committee was concerned about the loss of the 30% advance payment, which they thought would make it very difficult for the third sector to cope with. The Scottish Government has given quite a lengthy explanation in the paper that basically it was discontinued to prevent various problems that they had in managing the programme. Basically, it seemed to create more problems than benefits in terms of overpayment and underpayment, and then all the ensuing problems that led to for the third sector. So that's why they've not agreed to that recommendation, and they've also said that they feel that their new strategic approach, which involves primarily the use of the various strategic delivery bodies, will provide a better alternative and basically create a more stable platform for third sector to engage with the 2014 programme. So that's the main points, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I do see that the government did give us quite a detailed response, and I think there's some things in there that we sort of probably need to have a close look at as regards to your recommendations and what the government is suggesting as to how we take this forward. Members got any questions? Jamie?
Well, I just wonder why the Scottish Government has not agreed to the committee's recommendations.
Jenny?
In number 3, in point
Any
3.
particular one, Jamie? Was there
Sorry?
any particular?
Point 3.
Point 3.
The Scottish Government has not agreed to the committee's recommendation to instigate a common code of practice and a champions list in order to assist both the third sector to deliver the funds and applicants for funding.
Yes, I think that
Instead, Scottish Government officials will work with stakeholders to develop national rules. I mean, why won't they agree with our recommendations?
well, I think I kind of summarised it before, Jamie, but they seem to think that their strategic delivery approach is better.
So they know better than we do then?
I can't comment on that, Jamie.
I think, I know the evidence that we had taken from the third sector groups and other organisations were pretty much split down the middle on this one about whether a champions list would work or not and how that would work and who would maintain it. And I think that's some of the problems that the government are highlighting here. And they do have their working group, and I think they're talking about beefing that up a wee bit to make it a bit more strategic in the sense that, you know, it gives guidance and support to organisations, and it maybe will address the problems. But I think, Jamie, you're right, it's maybe something that the committee should monitor and have feedback from the organisations who called for the champions list to see if maybe the new proposals that the government's suggesting actually work. Yeah?
I mean, could we get an explanation of why they think our recommendations are wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
What we could probably do in the first instance is take what they've written to us with and go back to the stakeholders, ask them if that's satisfying their concerns. Once we receive that response, then we can write to the Scottish Government and ask them for further information, or indeed to reinforce the original view of the committee, which was for these particular suggestions. So we can do it in that fashion if the committee's minded.
I don't want to go over. I mean, I just wonder why. It's quite a sort of statement, you know, the Scottish Government has not agreed with the committee's recommendation. And we did take quite a lot of time over that.
Yeah, we did. And I think this is just the first stage, really, in doing this feedback exercise. Ian's absolutely correct. One of the things that I would like to do is to go back to all the stakeholders to see if they're happy with what the government has suggested. If they are, then fair enough. But if they aren't, then we've got then an avenue to go back to the government to suggest maybe other ways to look at this.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to bring it up because it was a diversion from our policy, if you know what I mean, as a committee.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Chair, yeah.
Gonzalo and then Claire.
Thank you. I think one of the challenges is the type of work different people are doing, and it would have been difficult, I think, to measure like for like. It would be extremely difficult to be able to do that, and I think that difficulty itself is fraught with challenges, and I think that's why the government perhaps is feeling that it would be a difficult exercise to do, and we're not sure whether that would be value for time and effort and money at the end of the exercise. However, I'm happy with your suggestion, Chair, that we can go back and ask the people on the ground to see what their views on this issue, but I think it'll probably come down to this at the end.
Okay, thank you. Claire?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. On item 3, it would be really useful if we could ask the government what the timescales are for developing the national rules and the responsibilities, and maybe an overall timescale of the strategic plan would be useful for the committee as well. And in terms of number 4, obviously I came quite late to the investigation of what was happening, but I think for small organisations it was the start-up costs and cash flow that were the issues. And I wonder if it would be possible to look at other partners to see that are working in social enterprise area to see if there's some way of mitigating that based on the decision of the government.
It's a good idea as well. Jamie?
One or 2 points, is that all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Point 5, European funding that may be underutilised. I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. I was trying to sort of translate into my own mind what that number 5 means.
Want an answer on that? Yeah, no, Jamie?
I just find it difficult to understand the point about the European funding that may be underutilised.
Okay,
What do we mean by that?
I think he
What
can
is the-
explain that for you, yeah.
I think I can help there. You might remember when we had the discussion that there were certain strands of money which the Scottish Government was very good at accessing and drawing down, but we learned there were a number of other funds which were less well known and from which the Scottish Government had less experience in accessing. And so I think it's almost euphemistic to say underutilised. It might be true to say not really utilised at all. So one of the things we were looking to try and explore is, or encourage the government to explore, is if there's money out there, we should certainly be getting the money due to Scotland. And it was that idea that we look at not just the funds we're good at getting money from, but at the range of funds available to Scotland.
It would be very important.
Yes.
My next point, may I go on, convener?
Yeah, just I'll answer your point. One of the things that we're looking at in our forward work programme is looking at what other funding streams are out there and whether they match with projects that we have currently in Scotland. So just expanding that.
All right, well,
horizon a bit, yeah.
Ian sort of explained what they meant by that. Number 6, what's the time scale on that? Do we know?
It's every 6 months.
November's the first update, and then after that, every 6 months.
The committee is, yep.
We've got our first update from government.
This is the
in
committee is
November.
invited to consider the Scottish Government's response and note that the Scottish Government will send regular updates on progress regarding these funds.
Yeah, the first one will be in November, and then every 6 months thereafter.
Okay.
So sort of in November, May.
Yep.
That
Then,
way, yeah.
can I just ask about my region of the Highlands and Islands?
Certainly can.
It says the Highlands and Islands is currently classed, this is on page, whatever it is, annex, it's in the annex. The Highlands and Islands is currently classed as a convergence region and is likely to be classed as a transition region in the future programme, given its current GDP level of 83% of the EU average. And my question really is, okay, but when? And the other point is, isn't a convergence region mean that the area has GDP less than 75% of average GDP? Why am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think Ian can update you
Yes.
on that one as well.
All of this discussion is basically anchored within the next macro EU budget that will kick off in 2014, so that's when it will go live. You might remember from our discussions on structural funds that under the present system there are more or less 2 categories. There is the category which is below a given level of GDP, which would be a region that experiences degrees of poverty. Now, Scotland didn't qualify in that category in the last round. The reason being that when the new member states joined from the east, which had a lower GDP, they dragged down the average, and the Highlands and Islands and the rest of Scotland were therefore deemed to be above that level at which action would be taken. That frustrated not just the UK, but almost all the Western EU member states who had previously been recipients. So they've created a new buffer category to try and help regions such as the Highlands and Islands who fit into this new band where they are. Yes, it's in effect it is. Yeah, it's to try and make sure that, if you're being cynical, it's to try and make sure that the Western countries get some of the money. If you're listening to if you're listening to the EU, it's because it's a sensible way of taking forward the policy. So it depends on your cynicism and your optimism. But it does mean that the Highlands and Islands will get more money. I think that's the important bit.
Well, of course.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know. I think I was just. Do we know when?
From 2014.
2014.
2014.
Yeah.
I think that's everything.
Okay. Willie?
It's not.
Convener, could I spin us back to number 3 again? I just wanted to offer a comment on that Champions List comment that was made earlier. I mean, from my reading of it and just having joined the committee, of course, the Champions List looks to me like almost like a best practice list of practitioners and so on. And I read the Scottish Government explanation there, which does suggest that best practice will be shared. So I think, not having been part of the committee's deliberations on it, I think the committee's intention will probably ultimately be delivered through that mechanism anyway. So I think the end or the outcome will be the same. I think the committee will really achieve what it set out to do in the first place, I think.
Okay, helpful comment, thank you. Any other comments on this paper? Jamie, on you go.
On page 7, the advance, near the top, the advance payment was commonly used in ESF, which is the European Social Fund, re-employment. It was decided at the start of the current programme period to cease advance payments because of the additional problems that they caused in terms of managing the programme effectively. Advance payments frequently resulted in overpayments. Why did the advance payments frequently result in overpayments? Do we know, have we any idea of why?
Yeah, I think maybe I've got an idea. I used to run a programme that was ESF funded, and when you had an advanced payment and you didn't meet the outcomes, because sometimes you just didn't, especially if it was employment outcomes, you then had to pay back the money that you had got as an advance. So what they do now is they pay it in arrears, basically.
Oh, right.
So that you get paid on outcomes rather than, you know, paid up front, which can be an issue for an organisation if you're managing it, but from an audit and monitoring point of view, it's maybe the best way to do it as well.
It's a big delay in getting the funds.
Well, and some of the challenge was a delay in getting the funds, but the other challenge was if there was overpayments to organisations, is claiming that back, because that is then claimed back from the European Commission if you've not used it. So it was creating a knock-on problem all the way back to Brussels that was causing detriment to other maybe projects that could have used the money. And is that right? Is that?
That's exactly right.
I think I had nightmares running that project. So. Okay, Jamie, exhausted all your questions?
Well, not entirely.
Oh.
Sorry about this, because you've got a statement on page 9. The committee recommends that the Scottish Government continues to be involved in key discussions at the UK level to ensure that Scotland's particular needs and concerns are reflected in negotiations, and provides a regular update to the committee. And I'm just saying, are you saying then we need that Scotland needs a seat at the table?
I would suggest that a number of the organisations suggested that too, and I agree with them.
I'm not asking the convener for your own personal opinion.
I know.
Is that what we're saying in this report or not?
Yeah, I think we'll let Ian come in, because there's a couple of technicalities in this one that I think maybe Ian could maybe answer much more constructively.
Well, maybe not much more constructively, but this is actually taken from our own report. And the purpose behind that was to ensure that the Scottish Government was participating in every possible way with the UK Government being the key negotiator on these particular issues. And the important part here was that we learned the outcome of these discussions between London and Edinburgh so that we could monitor and, where appropriate, comment. So I think in answer to your question, it's probably both, insofar as the UK Government remains the member state, but Scotland has clearly got aspirations to be as involved in this as possible.
Okay, all right. That's the end of my questions, convener. I beg your pardon for asking so many.
Well done for doing your homework.
Could I just ask
Rod.
I find it quite difficult understanding what was meant by the paragraph in relation to financial instruments. Is there a kind of easy guide to what we're talking about here?
Yes, but it's about 40 pages long, I suspect, so no.
Full of acronyms.
I think one of the ambitions of the current round of determination of the next EU multi-annual financial framework is to make it easier. But as the Commission will always say, the easier they make it, the more they have to put into the annex, and into the annex go all the rules. So you end up with what seems to be quite an easy paper up front, with a very big engine down behind, which you have to master anyway, defeating the point. One thing we could do, if there was an appetite from the committee, is ask SPICE to produce a paper that clarifies. And indeed, we were talking again in the work programme later about some of the work we might do in understanding the broad range of funds available from the EU, and it may well be as part of that exploration we can ask SPICE to produce some material.
That might be helpful.
Are you done with that? Excellent. Thanks very much for all the input. It's always very helpful. Moving on to agenda item 4 is our Horizon 2020 report, and I think Jen is going to talk briefly through the response that we have to that. Jen, thanks very much.
Again, the response from the government was generally quite positive. It details a number of activities specific to the committee's recommendations that are being taken forward by the government and the Scottish steering group. You'll recall that most of the findings for the report they derived from a conference that the committee held back in May. So some of the main points that were brought out during that conference was with regards to procurement policies. The government draws attention to a consultation that they launched on the 10th of August regarding the proposed procurement reform bill. And they're currently seeking views on how procurement can be used to encourage innovation and growth to help businesses develop and commercialise new goods, services and work for internal and international markets. This was this was something that was brought up by the delegates during the conference, and this is something that the government's responded to. Also, regarding the SPAF funding, which is the Scottish Proposal Assistance Fund, the government, again, the delegates highlighted the popularity of that funding, and the government said that there was a review of that, or it was being discontinued. So the delegates have asked for the government to look into the analysis of that to see if a new funding mechanism has been implemented and how successful it was. Again, this has been taken forward by the steering group. And although the government did acknowledge the popularity of the SPAF programme, it did also highlight drawbacks, such as the limited capacity building and SME applicants. So also keeping with the theme of funding programmes, in relation to the PACER programme, the PACER programme is a proposal assistance for coordination of European research. The government advised in the response that this funding support is now provided through PEER, another acronym, which is Pools Engagement in European Research. And finally, in response to the committee's call for a single portal for information, again, this was highlighted during the conference by delegates as something that they found quite important. The government explained this would be difficult to achieve because of the different elements within the EU programme and the elements that are delivered under contract with the Commission from different bodies. However, the steering group, again, is going to look into, it's something that the steering group is going to look into, signposting the relevant portals and advice, and it's something that should come through with their findings as well.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Any questions, comments? Jamie?
One comment. Just on the statement, bridging the gap between research and business, and going back to the day we had, do you remember, in the chamber, when I remember some of the business comment, and I've heard it since, that one of the main difficulties seems to be combining the research, the university research is very, very good, and it's somehow getting the business community, the sort of innovation side of it, linked into that, which is the problem at the moment. I mean, this has been, I'm probably not expressing it very well, but it's been portrayed to me by businessmen, and I was wondering perhaps if we ought to ask some of the people who perhaps appeared at that conference we had that day, whether they would agree with the findings on this, or whether they're still unhappy about, you know, not that there was a particular areas of unhappiness, but the word, this is a very, very important thing. You know, combining, you know, excellent research and actually getting it moving into producing products and into business. So I was wondering if perhaps it might be worth inquiring as to whether people are now happier who came that day, perhaps. I don't know what you think about that.
I think you're absolutely right, Jamie. The same exercise will be undertaken with this response as to the EU structural funds response, and as much as we will send this out to a number of probably key delegates, specifically maybe look out the people that had raised the issues about business, because there was a few, and you had obviously highlighted some of them yourself. Just sort of for your information, I've got a meeting next week with Kevin Moore, who was one of the main contributors, who sort of spearheads some of the life sciences in Scotland. I'm meeting with him and a number of other people from academia and Scottish Enterprise to look at how can we identify the problems with linking up innovation with business, the very point that you make. So that meeting's next week. I'm happy to report back to committee on that, on the progress of that. But you're absolutely right. I think we need to get this information out to the stakeholders and get their feedback and then take it from there.
I met by chance with a gentleman called Melfort Campbell, who was one of the people who came. And he was reiterating, I just happened to see him at a funeral last week, and he was reiterating the points made before, that you know, there seems to be a kind of lack of synergy between the research and the innovation somehow.
And that's the life sciences sector do it very, very well. So what I want to do is learn the lessons that they've learned and how they do that, and try and apply that to other business sectors. And I think Melford Campbell was very, very helpful at the conference that day with his comments. And I think we should ensure that we get a proper response back from them to help us inform where we go from there. Yeah, Claire?
Yeah, it's just a follow-on from Jimmy's statement. I think this is really important, and it came through in the Scotland Europa conference as well, that Scotland's research is second to none in the world, but we're not capitalising on that research, and the benefits of that research seem to be going outside of the country. And I think even though the life sciences are doing it quite well, I still think there's an underperformance in life sciences in terms of getting that right. And I think it would be really interesting if we could maybe get some research in other sectors to see if this is a trend, and identify countries that are actually doing this maybe better than Scotland, and maybe learn some lessons. But it would be really useful to see the overall picture.
Can I suggest again, that might be a piece of work we can commission from SPICE, who can give us the feedback. We bring that back here and we can actually look at it and then follow it up with appropriate questions to whomsoever.
Jamie?
I'm just wondering if it might be worth getting perhaps a small panel of those people to come to in front of us and explain what the intricacies of what they actually mean. When they say there is there's a gap there somewhere, that's because I find it difficult to, in my layman's capacity, to take it on board exactly what the problem is. But
I think that would be very helpful. Yeah.
That makes sense. What we can do then, just to schedule this, we will write out to each of the participants in the conference, giving them the response from the government, and follow that up specifically with the business players. We'll also commission from SPICE then an analysis of how the different sectors are performing or underperforming. Once we have that information to hand, then we can bring in a small panel to discuss the findings of that material, which may well be either at the very end of this year or the beginning of next year, just in terms of scheduling.
Yeah, okay. Willie?
Thanks, Convener. My attention was drawn to paragraph 41.3 in your recommendations. It's on page 8 there. It really struck me as being almost the same plea as you mentioned in the previous item, to ask for information and support for those making applications for funding, right? So you've said there as a matter of urgency, so that immediately drew my attention to this. So, I mean, I've read the response there from the Scottish Government? Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, what if you're an SME that doesn't really, or doesn't know how even to engage with both the agencies? Are you left out of the loop? And I noticed that the comment at the tail end of that, there on another page as well, we can use social media as well as email alerts and so on. I just wondered if the committee members felt that that was enough to reach out and to make sure that all the organisations were aware of the potentials here.
Well, I think you've highlighted something that I picked up myself, actually, and that's one of the topics that are on the agenda for the meeting I'm having next week, because one of the groups, we had the Scotland Europa conference here, the 20th celebration, 20-year celebration, and there was a number of people in the room who have been very successful in working with Scotland Europa, but there was a number of people who weren't in that room who should be successful working with Scotland Europa, so they have identified that as one of the targets that they're looking at. Scottish Enterprises, who I'm meeting with next week to look at that. One of the other places that we don't look as often as we should is the Chambers of Commerce. And that's one of the recommendations I think we should be taking forward in the committee, is to let's engage much more with the Chambers of Commerce and maybe link Scottish Enterprise and Scotland Europa, who link very well with the Chambers of Commerce in ordinary circumstances, but on this specific topic, get them working together to really push this specific topic, because there'll be businesses out there, thousands of businesses that are members of the Chambers, but not even know Scotland Europa exists, and that's part of the problem that we have to maybe push.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks,
Claire?
Convener. Yep.
I think it's probably worth reiterating one of the themes from the SMEs that came out from the conference that we held in the Chamber as well was the timescales involved. And although Horizon 2020 is streamlining and reducing and everything, it's actually the decision-making processes, which can, I think they were looking to bring it down to maybe 3 months, has been the best target for a lot of the small and medium enterprises. They're working in such a way that the timescales are keeping them out of that process, and I think that's something we still have to do a bit of work on.
Okay, is that all the comments on this paper? Can I just, as a matter of interest to the committee, and hopefully seek your permission, I've been invited along to some of the sessions in the Committee of the Regions, and I've identified a few of them that actually tie in with our work programme. So I'm hoping with, as I say, with the support of the committee to go along. There's one about strengthening the roles of nations and regions in the recovery strategy, which is about how do you identify more EU funding and use it to boost your economy, which is obviously very relevant. And there's another one about, it's called Cities of Excellence, but we could apply it obviously to our rural areas as well, and it's about Horizon 2020. How do we, you know, how is other parts of Europe doing it? Where have they done it extremely well? Where can we learn lessons from that and bring that back? I'd be happy to report back to the committee on these. There's a number of other ones there that I need to get a bit more detail on as well, that I probably would be interested in going along to, and happy to report back to the committee. So I'm obviously seeking the committee's indulgence to sanction me going across to do that. It's out on the Monday, back on the Tuesday. It's a very short visit in the first 2 days in recess, October recess.
Chair, I think it's important that you do that for us. If you're not engaging, then we're not going to pick up valuable lessons, and it saves us reinventing the wheel. I think that it's important that you do that if you can for us.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. Yeah. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5, which is the Brussels Bulletin. I think we'll hand over to Ian and let him give us his report along with the Brussels Bulletin. Ian.
Yes, this is slightly longer than the usual Brussels Bulletin because it does cover from the last time we met, which was actually at the back end of May, right the way through to last week. There's a couple of things which is worth drawing your attention to, I think. The first one is each year now a tradition has begun where President Barroso sets out his assessment of the State of the Union, as it's called. And there are a couple of issues here which I think are worth flagging up. The first one is his idea there should be a youth package. Now, there's a lot of concern at the moment that a whole generation is being lost, primarily as a result of the financial crisis and its implications across the whole of the EU. And he's looking to try and prioritise issues targeted at a particular generation so that it doesn't get lost. And that's perhaps one thing to follow on through. Developments in the Eurozone, I got up to point 7 and stopped. I could have got to point 17. There have been so many developments in the Eurozone. One of the things, again, which is coming up is the Prime Minister of Italy has called for what he's looking for, a unity summit, which is to try and encourage, if you like, the European ideal of working together. There seems to have been, over the summer, a greater schism within the EU regarding the haves and have-nots, or the indebted and the debt holders. He is trying to move again back to the traditional model of Europe pulling together in the same direction, and that could be interesting. much of this is primarily stemming from Germany's concerns and lukewarm appreciation of some of the banking reforms and financial reforms, again, primarily because they hold the money, which is, again, why they're less inclined toward this. The other things here, the banking union is another one which will be important. The UK sits out with the proposals for a banking union, but again, a number of them would actually read across, potentially across from within the Eurozone out with, and that's causing some concern to those countries out with the Eurozone itself. And that would include the UK, it includes Denmark, it includes some of the other smaller countries too. Other things in here are more or less following up from some of your own initiatives. Again, you'll see some stuff again. The Energy Efficiency Directive has moved toward conclusion. You might remember when we spoke about this the last time, this is the only part of the broad energy package which is not binding. So the targets, the 20% energy savings, are not a binding target. And what they've done now is they've explained how they intend to meet how they intend to meet this target without recourse to the law. And that's worth having a real look at because it doesn't stack up, I think, my guess. But who knows, it might work. Something again for you, Hanzala, the Smart Cities Initiative is something which is, there's quite a bit of material in on that, which is worth looking at. They're really trying to push this forward now and get some money behind it, which I think, again, is something worthwhile exploring. Happy to answer any questions on any of the other material in here. The other news bit, and finally, has quite a lot as well, covering everything from macro right the way through. So if you want to ask any questions, I'm happy to follow that up.
Okay, Hanzala.
Thank you very much. And it's quite a detailed bulletin. However, there's two issues here. Well, not issues really. I'm looking for information. One is on terms of the water management. Now, I know that the Scottish Water have been struggling in terms of keeping up with the EU's challenges that they face in terms of modernisation and water delivery and, of course, the repairing and replacing of the old structure. I'm just wondering how well we're coping with that, and are we now up to speed with the European Union, or are we still lagging behind in that area? That's the first point. And the second point was smart cities, and that's where your visits would come in very useful, because that would help us with that, Chair, in terms of smart cities. So that's a challenge that perhaps you'll be able to assist us directly with that. But going back to the water one, I'm just keen to see where we are with that, because what we don't want to do is find ourselves in a position where we're fined for not keeping up with current legislation with the EU.
Yes, I can answer that. The water management, they're calling it a blueprint, as a pun, in fact. This is to look at, in effect, managing Europe's waters for the next, well, almost the next generation. So at the moment, it's still quite early days, in fact. The proposals themselves will not emerge until November of this year. Now, they will cover everything. They'll cover a broad range from sort of smart metering inside homes to flood management to drought in some of the southern member states and so forth. It will be a very comprehensive document. This may well be something which the committee takes an active interest in. It may be one it wishes to refer to the Rural Affairs Committee as a priority issue for taking forward. In terms of where Scottish Water fits within this, it will be worthwhile monitoring what is going on once it is published, literally then asking Scottish Water its views on this particular proposal and what it means for them. I think at that stage you'll be in a better position to tell us the answer.
Chair, can I come back on that?
Yes,
In terms, I know historically that we have faced challenges in this area, and I'm just keen to ensure that when we actually put to print that, you know, we're ahead of the game if that's possible. I think the challenges are there, and what we need to make sure is that we need to be in a position to ensure that we can assist Scottish Water in trying to face up to some of the challenges that they will face. And I'm just wondering whether they're going to be able to highlight some of the challenges earlier before they go to print, so that we can see how we can support and assist and cushion those challenges.
Well, there are two ways to approach this. We can write to Scottish Water now. We can bring them in to give evidence if we feel that Scottish Water are ready to do that. They may be disinclined to do that at this stage just because it would preempt the actual proposals, but there's no harm, if you wish, to do two things. We can write to Scottish Water, or we can write to the Scottish Government, both of whom will have something to say on this. The Scottish Government will be one of the players in terms of the UK negotiating position. So it may well be that the Scottish Government, as a first step, if you write to them and see where they stand on this particular area. Thereafter, we can follow it up with Scottish Water once we've got a clear idea of where the Scottish Government is standing on this. But we can do both as well. If you wish to bring them in, there is no difficulty in doing that.
Chair, just to finish off, finalise, I think it's a good idea. I think we should contact the Scottish Government in the first instance to make sure that we're in a position to be able to support Scottish Water in what they're trying to do, because end of the day, historically, I know that they've had some very serious challenges, and I'm just hopeful that we're in a better position than we have been historically in trying to support them. We need to be more focused on what we're doing here.
Okay. Committee agreed. We'll write to the Scottish Government. Yeah. Okay. Helen.
Just for arriving later. The point about the banking reform really excited my attention, and you'll understand why when I explain what my concern is. I mean, I think what I welcome in the document that has been given to us is that it states that in the future bankers' losses should no longer become the people's debt, putting into doubt the financial stability of whole countries. And I'm sure that probably everyone around this table would agree with that comment, which comes from President Barroso, and I really welcome that. However, I do have a concern because the pace at which the proposals are being put to the Council of Ministers, and it's being stated there that the Commission has asked the Council and the Parliament, that's the European Parliament, to consider and adopt the proposals as quickly as possible, allowing the changes to come into force by the 1st of January 2013. And the Commission foresees a phase-in period to last until 1st of January 2014, when all the banks would be covered by the mechanism. And EU leaders are expected to formally adopt the plan at their December 2012 Council. Now, the reason that concerns me is that the European Parliament would only have the right to express a non-binding opinion on the package, and that's something that it says in our papers that the Parliament has demanded a co-decision powers with the Council. Now, I think that is something that any democratic body would agree is something that we would want to back the European Parliament on that particular proposal. But my concern is, and as you know, both in the Chamber and elsewhere, I have discussed the question of the Parliament itself doing an urgent inquiry. I think this just underlines the urgency of having an inquiry, given the proposals of the Scottish Government to have a referendum on the whole issue of a euro. I have been doing some homework on this, and this is a paper by the European Commission's Economic and Financial Affairs dated the 17th of September 2012. And it states all those new countries that become members of the euro. For example, Latvia has become a member of the European Union. They have to join the euro by the 1st of the 1st, 2014. Romania are compelled to join by the 1st of January 2015. And the other countries that have joined do not yet have current target dates for adoption of the euro. Now, if Scotland goes ahead and it does agree that we will become an independent state, and that has to be a realistic possibility, the fact is that Scotland would in that instance then become a new member state, according to the papers that I have read. And that means that we would then become part of the euro. Now, this is going to mean that we would come under this banking reform, banking union. And that, for me, presents some difficulties, because I think that the people of Scotland should be able to understand and fully comprehend everything that's in these banking union reforms. Now, as it stands, the papers, the proposals say that it would have the Eurozone, the European Central Bank would have the powers to close banks within member states. Now, I can just see the RBS and all the other banks across Scotland leaping up in surprise and horror to some of these proposals. Some people might actually welcome them, but I come back to my point, and in the papers that we've received today, my proposal that I put to you as a convener is not reflected in that. You're talking about examining the relationships of the European Union come the government's publication of the white paper. I am asking for an urgent inquiry into the euro and our position within that, and also the situation with regards to membership of the European Union, what its impact would be on the people of Scotland. And I don't want the answer just for me, and I don't just want it for this Parliament, I want an answer for the people of Scotland. The government has the right to get its legislative advice from its legal advisers, and I know today they're in court in that matter. I do believe that this Parliament and the people of Scotland have the right to take its independent legal advice and opinions and get witnesses here before it. Now, I know that my proposal that I put to you and to this committee has not been enshrined and is not reflected in the work programme. But I repeat again, no, it's not. It's talking about, if you examine the words carefully, it's talking specifically about relationships with the European Union. It's not talking about the euro, and it's not talking about, and it's only talking about considering it. So, I mean, I think this underlines the fact that there is this urgency now that this has to last until the phase-in period will last until the 1st of January 2014. It's just not going to give us time if we follow what is in their papers today.
Okay, Ian's going to answer the first part of your question, Helen, and the second part, I think we will take that up in private session because it does pertain to the work programme.
Again, you want to gag me again in public. That's what you wanted to do,
Helen,
this is such an important topic
Helen,
that you want
Helen,
this matter to be gagged.
Helen, if you had been at the start of the meeting, Helen, the committee agreed.
When our gate outside breaks for the 999th time of the Parliament, then I can't get into the Parliament's car park, then I can't help it if I can't be here at the start of the meeting. That wasn't my fault. That's the Parliament's responsibility.
Helen, at that point, the committee agreed to take that section in private.
Yes, but this isn't about that section because my proposal is not reflected in the papers that are there. I'm talking about a proposal that I'm putting to you now that needs to be regarded as being urgent.
Helen, can I caution you again that the work programme is a private document? Any breach of that confidentiality is a breach of the Code of Conduct under section. Helen,
my proposal is not in the work programme, so we're not talking about what's in the work programme. We're talking about a proposal that I'm putting to you today.
You're talking about something that should be scheduled in the work programme, which is a conversation we have to have under the work programme, which this committee agreed at the beginning of the meeting to do in private, which is the normal and natural protocol of this committee structure in the Parliament.
Only matters that are commercial or sensitive to an individual should be discussed in private in this Parliament. That is the standing orders of this Parliament. There is nothing commercially sensitive and there is nothing relating to an individual that should be discussed by the work programme of this Parliament.
The protocol of the Parliament is if a
there is no protocol covering that. There's a standing order. The standing order dictates what it is.
Desist, please. The committee agreed at the start to take that agenda item in private, which we will continue to do for today. Okay? I'm going to move on. Ian, can you answer Helen's earlier points?
Yes, I can. Helen, you are right to draw attention of the committee to the speed with which this will be taken forward. The idea that this will now be in effect into force by the 1st of January leaves almost no time for any serious debate inside the European Parliament. You're correct to point out, again, the European Parliament does not have any co-decision powers here, and you'll also be aware that whenever money is discussed, the Council doesn't like the Parliament to be too heavily involved because the Parliament has very different and clear views about how money should be spent. That being said, there are a number of implications for countries out with the Eurozone, including the UK, including Denmark, where they will have to take decisions, because there's no doubt that once this is in force, its implications for the European Union, rather than just the Eurozone, will be serious. And so I suspect at that point, during this next period, the UK will be very diligent in trying to make sure that nothing comes forward which will do harm to banking in the UK. Other member states will be taking that exact same position. Germany is, curiously enough, it's not those out with the Eurozone who are likely to slow this down, it's Germany. Because although the European Central Bank board basically voted to bring this forward, it was not unanimous, and the one dissenting voice was Germany. given that Germany seems to be the biggest player in terms of finance, I find it difficult to believe they could move forward very quickly without Germany. So if Germany is not keen to move this forward in the given timescale, it will not happen. I don't believe it will happen in this timescale unless Germany accepts that. But you are right that Barroso was quite clever in saying the whole point about doing this is to try and stop the crises which the world has gone through, with banks more or less being bailed out by the public purse, to stop that. So his ambitions behind it will be popular and populist. Whether the actual detail of the proposals which come forward are acceptable remains to be seen. I have some doubts.
Okay, thank you. Jamie.
I was going back to the water point. I just wanted to ask Ian if the water management, so I've lost it now, I need to say, but whether that includes what they call the EU Water Framework Directive, which relates to, it's quite important to Scotland because it relates to rivers and from the point of view of the whisky industry and that sort of extractions, and also, I may say, for the tourism and angling industry is quite important to Scotland. And I just wondered if that, what you were talking about there, does that relate also to the EU Water Framework? Because I'm confused about that.
Yes, you'll be aware the Water Framework Directive came into force in 2000, I think it was. There are a number of macro documents that cover water, both fresh and salt water. The purpose behind this, as they're calling it, a blueprint, is to try and move this to the next stage. So it's very likely that those issues will be examined as part of a broader change. Whether there is, it's never always clear when the EU announces grand initiatives, whether it plans to make grand laws to back them up, whether it intends to revise current laws, or whether it just intends to encourage good practice. And at the moment, I think they're hedging their bets and saying all are possible, but they haven't said which are likely to be taken forward. So my guess here, my hunch would be from earlier discussions with some people in Brussels, is that this is going to take such a long time that we will have ample opportunity to make sure that issues of concern to Scotland and concern to anglers and to whisky and so on are very well addressed, because they want to get this right. They also want to make sure that the money works well, so that subsidies, which in the past have been seen to be harmful ultimately to the environment, are anchored into doing good. So it may well be that anglers benefit from some of the work done in that area. We'll know a lot more in November, but I'm out in Brussels next week, and I can have another dig around and see what I can find out and bring back some more material to the committee.
And just one further point on that, of course, rural Scotland has a great many people who live on private water supplies.
Yes.
Which are not, and I reading this, it's almost as though there's a move to put everybody on the mains, which I mean would cost staggering amounts of money, I would imagine. Yeah. But I mean, I think it's just worth making the point that a lot of Scotland, you know, it may not be a huge number in percentage terms, but in rural Scotland there are a lot of private water supplies.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the kind of thing which this Parliament is at its strongest when it's able to articulate these particular sorts of views which the Commission may not hear from other sources. So absolutely. I will do some more digging next week, bring back some more material, and we will have time then to decide whether indeed it's this committee which seeks to lead on it, or it may be Rural Affairs. They may be doing some work on this already, but I can't remember.
Thank you very much.
Maybe, Jamie, as a point of information, a chat with our colleague Stuart Maxwell, who is one of our representatives to the Committee of the Regions. There was an extensive debate at the last, maybe the last of the one before that, Committee of the Regions about this, because the initial proposals actually were quite detrimental to countries like Scotland, who are sort of a water-rich. They were pretty detrimental, as I say. So maybe a conversation with our colleague on his experience there and what conditions they then managed to secure. Okay.
Thank you, Rowena.
Yep. Anybody else on the Brussels Bulletin?
Just a
Rod?
point of pedantry, possibly. In the banking union, the section, the third paragraph before the end, I think there must be a couple of words missing, like remains to be seen. Or
Missing because sometimes we don't do as much proofreading as we should do, but we will add the words in before it goes public.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Claire?
Just some clarification on some of the issues. It states that in terms of the Barroso's address, that further political and institutional integration would be required. Would treaty changes be required for the banking union to go ahead? And a wee bit more information. I'm not expecting an answer today in this, but it says that non-Euro countries could join on a voluntary basis. Are there any further details on that? And also the statement about the UK would be expected to work in close cooperation with the ECB. Could we have a wee bit further about what cooperation there is at the moment between the UK banking system and the Eurozone area, and what the expected cooperation would be? Thank you. Okay.
Taking those in order, the banking union can be achieved without treaty change, but treaty change is being discussed for other reasons in terms of the broader financial setup. So they can go forward with what they're proposing without doing that, but it's likely to be part of a bigger adjustment to financial management within the EU itself. In terms of non-Eurozone members joining on a voluntary basis, Denmark is exploring that right now. The idea would be that they would, in effect, be entirely compliant with the code, and they would allow oversight by the central bank into their own banks themselves. In a sense, the idea being that you would be overseen by the European Central Bank, despite the fact you do not hold the currency of the euro itself. So it's entirely possible. The UK is not, as I understand it, pursuing that route. And the question again about working closely with the UK authorities are very keen to work very closely to stop it having an impact, a detrimental impact upon the UK banking sector. So in a sense, it's almost being close to stop them doing stuff rather than being close to help them doing stuff. I think things will become again a little bit clearer because the UK government is expected to publish some material on this very soon. Again, because it's moving to such a swift timetable. So I'll be able to give you some more information on that again when I come back from Brussels.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Willie.
Thanks very much, Convener. It was firstly, I think that the bulletin is really, really very useful, and I have to admit it's the first time I've seen this. That would be of interest to many of the members throughout the Parliament, I think, but I never saw it in my days, and well, I'm still on the Audit Committee, of course, but it's
all the committees.
well, I'm just admitting I've never seen it, but I think it's really, really useful, and it provides that kind of summary and quick snapshot of everything that's going on within Europe. Again, Convener, my attention was drawn to page 4 in that area of treaty change that my colleague Claire Adamson mentioned there, where President Barroso is calling for a treaty change to transfer national competencies such as budgets to the European institutions. It's probably early days as well, but I can imagine what the response to that may well be. So I think we'll just be watching that with interest, I think, as that one develops. One that did interest me too, Convener, is perhaps not so contentious. It was on the whole area of broadband, and it's mentioned in page 10 in the bulletin there. I suppose if you put all our arguments and differences aside about Europe, when you talk about connectivity and business connectivity and the digital revolution, that's probably one area where there should be some kind of common approach, because all the member states within the European Union probably have different policies that apply to this, which give advantages or disadvantages to their own countries in respect of that kind of digital agenda. So if there's one area that I would hope that members here and members across the European Union should agree is to get some kind of commonality of digital capability throughout the Union to make sure that there's a level playing field for digital business.
The notion of the competence in terms of the budget issue is very serious because a member state's budget is the most precious thing it has. The idea that it would take that and give it to the EU to have a wee look at first before it publishes it, I would have thought would be extremely controversial. In my heart of hearts, I can't really believe they could do that because, they could do it, but I can't believe the member state would be bound by it. That's the thing. So if the officials in the Commission said you can't do it this way, and this way, I would have thought the officials in the member state would say, really? I think we can, and they would, and that's how it would happen. So I think it would defeat the point of doing it in the first instance. That would be my guess. But if it's done by treaty change, then of course there are sanctions which can be brought in if indeed that does happen. In terms of the broadband issue, and I know this is something which, Jamie, you've been talking about as well in terms of connectivity up in the Highlands and Islands, one of the bigger issues is that some of the providers are very keen to connect up the cheaper bits of Europe, if I can put it that way, where it's less expensive to do it, but far less inclined to do the same thing in some of the more upland areas, some of the more distant areas, and where they are keen to do that, or they're keen to charge a lot of money to do that. So it'll be interesting to see again, this is where the EU could be at its strongest. This is where it actually could make providers behave in a more appropriate manner, rather than trying to penalise those simply by where they live, but rather encouraging all to be, enable all to access the internet without ridiculous costs. So it's, and what often happens within the EU is that they start off with a, wouldn't it be nice if all the businesses behaved properly stage, and they spend a wee bit of time poking back and forth to try and get businesses to do that until they eventually discover that businesses are just not going to do that, and they move through voluntary code of practice to some sort of control. So it may well be that this goes through that same cycle. It's at the moment of poking them and saying behave. It may well end up in the next cycle of, and if you don't, we'll have sanctions against you.
Yeah.
Aye, thanks. I can certainly recognise that. I think really in looking back in my role as convener of the cross-party group and digital participation, you can see quite clearly that in member state countries, and the UK is no different, that the investment is where the greatest return is for the big commercial companies, and that's just the way it is. And it's up to national governments to reach the parts that others have failed to reach. That seems to be what's going on, and it's the pattern not only in Scotland and the UK, but probably across Europe too. So I'll just flag that up, convener, to offer some experience in another area where perhaps some kind of common ground could be reached in the European Union to achieve a kind of level playing field, not only for rural communities in Europe, but really amongst the partners themselves, to make Europe a truly connected digital state. You know?
I think that experience
revolutionary
very,
comment,
very welcome on the committee. Helen.
One area where I'd absolutely agree with what Willie Coffey says, and I think it's something that my memory is that there's billions of pounds have been set aside by the European Union's budget to actually try to achieve that better digital economy that we're all trying to be part of. But you can rest assured that I for one, would stand shoulder to shoulder with you on that specific aspect, because I think you're so right to say that we should reach the parts that others don't reach.
And not that we're advertising anything, but I think we'll welcome that, welcome we. Couple of things for me on the bulletin was the wee section on FP7 funding, and that call for proposals has gone out. And given, tying into Hans Ala's interest in smart cities and one of the Committee of the Regions events at their plenary sessions, can we get a wee update on where that's at and maybe how we've managed to maybe reach other people that we should be reaching? No. The other thing is the issue about the Roma issues. I have real grave concerns about this proposal. Some of the things I'd noticed the weekend before last was the rise of the far right in Greece and the racist attacks that were taken against people. If we go down the route, of relocating people and calling people illegal, and it puts a complexion and adds to a really negative culture, which I feel is brewing, and it happens in financial crises and recessions and lots of occasions where people that are different or maybe poorer or vulnerable are targeted, and I'm very concerned. I would maybe suggest, and I would hope the committee would agree with me, that we raise this particular point directly with our Parliament's Equal Opportunities Committee. It's just that I've got a real concern that there's something brewing there that we really don't want to allow to get out of hand at all. And we've seen some of it in Glasgow and Edinburgh with far-right groups wanting to march and spread some of the horrible hate and culture that they have towards other people of different nationalities and creeds. So I'm very concerned about that. And hopefully, if the committee would agree to raise that with the Equal Opportunities Committee. Helen.
I would agree with you. I think points that you make are absolutely sound. I think the only concern that I have is that I think the Equal Opportunities Committee, from what I've been reading, is at the point where it's agreeing a draft report, having completed an inquiry on it. So I'm not sure if we're too late to influence that or not, but I think the point you make still is very valid. And I would hope that whatever report comes out from the Equal Opportunities Committee, that whether the detail of what you're saying is there or not, I hope the spirit of what you're saying is there.
Very helpful, thank you. Ian?
Yes, absolutely. I think the work being done by the Equal Ops Committee, even if it has reached a later stage, would be useful to send to the key players in Brussels anyway, taking the Scottish experience and sending that forward. The Roma issue remains very controversial. It is a major media issue in France, which is why there is so much active interest in this just now. It will be interesting to see whether there is indeed a summit, an EU-wide summit on the Roma issue. I'm not sure there's an appetite across all member states to do that. France would be very keen to achieve that, so it will be interesting to see again. We have to always bear in mind at the moment the EU Council presidency is in the hands of the Cypriots. It may well be not a major issue for them, and it would be their responsibility to schedule such an event. That's not to say it will not happen. It's an issue to keep an eye on. We can certainly refer it onward. That is not difficult to achieve. And we should also encourage the Equal Ops Committee to keep a very close eye on this, and if they have no time in their agenda, to refer the issue back as per the European strategy of the Parliament. In terms of FP7, yes, what might be useful, at the moment they've just launched the call, it may be a little while before we know exactly who's feeding into it, but we might want to encourage or ensure the government is publicising this final call. This is the father of Horizon 2020, it's the predecessor of Horizon 2020. Might wish to encourage or to ensure the government is advertising this as widely as it possibly can.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, concluding the Brussels Bulletin? Yeah? Yep. Okay, thanks very much. I think lots of very interesting contributions. Is committee content to send the Brussels Bulletins to the relevant committee? Yeah, okay. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 6, which we agreed previously to take in private. Can I thank members of the public for attendance and have the gallery cleared? Thank you.